You're listening to Wildlife Control Consultant, where we provide research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest management. Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast, where we cover everything related to vertebrate pests from a technical and research-based point of view. Well, glad to have you on board. I hope your week went well. I have been, again, continuing to be busy. My life has gotten kind of complicated, but I'm going to keep persevering. Hope that your workload is lightening up a little bit so you can plan for the holidays, but not so much that you're not still making money. So I would love to hear from you, of course. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Of course, you know, my business here, I do some consulting work. This is my website, of course, wildlifecontrolconsultant.com. And you can come over here to our store and you can see some of the materials and supplies that we provide, various books, literature, also consultation. I do ghostwriting, if you'd like to have that, do some technical writing for you, as well as reviewing trainings. If you need training that's more personalized, certainly can help you do that. And also research, if you have particular topics involved that you'd like to have something done. Perhaps there's a protocol you'd like to have created for your company. So definitely check it out. If you're not sure, definitely reach out and ask. And of course, if you have a topic that you would like to have covered by the podcast, let me know. We're always looking for what's interest of our viewers, and we'd love to hear from you. Of course, criticisms, comments can also be done as well. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, or you could put some comments in below the video here. But nevertheless, actually, email is the best way to get a hold of me. All right, well, enough about that. Let me drop this off here. Wanted to talk a little bit about wildlife cameras. So I follow some of the stuff that's going on in the UK, that's United Kingdom. And with the rise of wildlife cameras, I was very intrigued by a news article in the Pest magazine, which is published from the UK, and it talked about how the British Pest Control Association, the BPCA, has established some guidelines for their organization, for their members, on the proper use of wildlife cameras. And what they're primarily concerned about is essentially sort of privacy issues when it comes to your clients. So with the rise of wildlife control cameras, pest control cameras that are being used, to monitor traps, perhaps monitor for pest activity. With the growth of those, does your company have a policy or a protocol for your workers to guide them in terms of their use? What happens if you have a client who is concerned about about the videos that you're taking on their property? You might have heard a few years ago, like with Alexa, there was a situation where there was some violence in the home and people thought Alexa was off, and it was actually recording the attack, and then it was subpoenaed, So obviously that is a pretty drastic or serious situation that can occur. But your company could be involved in something like this. And how are you going to protect your client's confidentiality? How are you what happens if the video or your photographs are taking things that are probably not criminal in nature, but perhaps of a sensitive nature? What if someone hacks into your wildlife camera, right? Let's say for example, you're using something that's Wi-Fi, or someone is able to grab the camera and pull out the SD card. What kind of policies do you have about that? Does your insurance cover that? Now, to be clear, I am not a lawyer, right? But in our litigious society here in America, it's probably not a bad idea for you to at least be thinking about how these cameras are used, where they're placed, and what sort of standards you should have if you're a one-man operation in your company, or if you have employees, are you teaching them how these cameras are supposed to be used, and what type of controls are there over this? So let's take a look at this particular website. So if you go to, I want to give credit to pestmagazine.co.uk. So we can go up here to the fast. You can see Pest Magazine here. And so this was published on November 4th, 2025. And basically it's summarizing the article. BPCA, that's the British Pest Control Association, publishes guidance on the ethical use of wildlife cameras in customer premises. And they basically talk about some major things, but here is what they would call the guidance outline of what I'll read these 4 bullet points for you here. And it says, always obtain informed customer consent before installation. Well, that certainly makes sense, right? So that means, do you have it in your contract? Are you having the person at least initial next to the line pointing out that yes, you're using a game camera on the premises, right? Number 2, minimizing what is recording and avoiding private spaces such as bedrooms and bathrooms. Okay, that's certainly serious enough. Keeping footage secure and deleting it once it's no longer needed. Now, that could be a tough one, right? You may have photos or video clips that might be useful, right? But then you're going to need to make sure that you anonymize that information. Or should you get permission from the client to use that photography information, right? It's now, when you ask, sometimes you're afraid they might say no. I mean, this is a question you might want to lay out with your client here. And lastly, in terms of this outline, there's certainly more to it. We're going to go to the BPCA website and look at it a little bit more thoroughly, but I love this little outline they've given, or some of the highlights. The last point they mentioned was maintaining clear documentation, such as a data protection impact assessment. That sounds like a UK type deal. And privacy notices. Well, we don't have any kind of policies here in the United States. There may be policies in your particular state on video work, but nevertheless, it's probably best to be proactive in this particular area. And perhaps, who wants to talk to their lawyer? But I can tell you, it's probably a lot cheaper to talk to your lawyer before there's a problem than after there's a problem, right? So this is probably something that you want to kind of reach out to your attorney, and maybe you need to have some wording added on to your contract, or perhaps a separate document, because you may not use a camera on every single site, right? So you may need to have a separate document that would be available if you decided to use a camera or more, right? So this is something to think about. Well, I hope this has kind of piqued your interest. But let's take a look over at the BPCA website. So the BPCA, as I said before, is the British Pest Control Association. Those of you in the United States are probably familiar with the National Pest Control Association here, which is, of course, covers the United States, and they have a branch, of course, in Canada. Well, this is the kind of the equivalent, but it's in the UK, right? So they have their organization, we have ours. Now, I don't want to say I'm not a member of the NPMA, National Pest Management Association, I should say. I'm not a member of the NPMA. I misquoted the NPMA before, but that is their. This is our organization in the United States and Canada, where the BPCA is the organization in the UK, sort of a professional association there for pest controllers. So here is their particular webpage, and you can look at this up on your own. It's at bpca.org.uk/news-and-blog/guidance using wildlife cameras in customer premises, staying ethical, legal, and professional/2792236. So I'll try to remember to have that put into the video itself, so that if you want to look that up, you can then grab it, and maybe I'll be able to put it into the notes as well. But nevertheless, this is their page for it, and it goes into more detail regarding the guidance that they are suggesting for their neighbors. And they've kind of put this out for everyone, because they want to raise the standards in the industry, of course. NPMA does similar type things. And so they have what they call a speed read here, which is kind of neat. So let me go over the highlights as the BPCA lists it in terms of what some of the concerns that they have. So let me try to blow this up a little bit more in case those of you trying to see this a little bit better. So the speed read, as they call it, is number one, wildlife cameras are powerful tools for pest professionals, but their use inside customer properties comes with ethical and legal responsibilities. Makes sense? Capturing footage, this is number two, capturing footage often means processing personal data, making you subject to the UK General Data Protection Regulation, UK GDPR, that must be a British law that they have over there, and the Data Protection Act of 2018. Again, this doesn't really apply to those of us in the United States. I don't know if Canada has something similar, but nevertheless, I'm encouraging you to have a chat with your lawyer, about this, okay? So number three, it says always obtain customer consent, minimize what's recorded, and secure all footage properly. Number four, good documentation such as data protection impact assessments and privacy notices is essential. There's a lot to be said for informed consent. When people are less likely to be angry with you, even if you're not always following the letter of the law per se, people are less likely, they're going to give you a lot more grace if they were informed rather than surprised. Okay? So this is one of those situations where you'd probably want to get ahead of this. Again, I'm not aware of any regulations here in the United States for some of this, but I think that it is a good idea to definitely be considering it. And then lastly, at number 5, the key, be transparent, proportionate, and professional every time you install a camera. Well, I think that's a wonderful advice. So they have some documents here, and I tried to download their customer information and consent form template. I didn't notice that it was member only, because when I clicked it, I got this privacy issue, right? So that won't work. You need to be a member if you're trying to get the documentation. But nevertheless, they do give you a lot of information here. Number 1, they have the legal landscape. Again, this is written for a United Kingdom audience, right? Nevertheless, there are going to be principles here that would certainly help your attorney draft a document, or perhaps tell you how you should adapt your present contract if it's a problem, if he thinks it's a problem. This will give him issues to think about, because it goes down in some pretty detailed means, even for something outside of the firewall. It talks about lawfulness, fairness, and transparency, like tell customers exactly what's being recorded and why, how long the footage will be stored, use footage only for pest management purposes and nothing else. Now, I would have a little bit of a disagreement with that, right? In terms of, I do think that there's going to be video taken that's going to be useful for perhaps marketing, right? You may have a picture of a raccoon coming out of an attic vent. I've certainly seen some of these videos, and they're kind of impressive, right? And they're done in a way that you couldn't tell who owned the house, right? But that also means you got to make sure the metadata on the video, or the metadata on the photograph, for example, has been removed, particularly if you're using things like your cell phone to take the photo, right? And some of these trail cameras may have metadata because they're tied into either cellular work or Wi-Fi work, and you got to make sure that the metadata is not associated, because otherwise someone could track that down and figure, oh, it was this house that had that problem. It says record only what's necessary to achieve the stated aim. Again, I think it's a good principle. I'm just not sure. Sometimes in wildlife control work, that you're casting a broad net because you're not exactly sure maybe what's going on. Okay. Ensure the footage accurately reflects the purpose for which it was recorded. Well, that certainly makes sense. I mean, if you have a camera on the outside of a building and it's, pointed towards someone's bedroom or someone's restroom, that could run the risk of that you're trying to do something nefarious, right? And so that's certainly a problem. Storage limitation, that is delete footage as soon as it's no longer needed for pest management activity. That can be tough. What happens if you're in a very difficult situation and you need to hold on to that footage because you're afraid there might be a lawsuit? Right? How many years should you hold on to it? Now, I take a lot of photos. I have another podcast. I had another podcast that I did on how to manage your photos and maintain your photos and that sort of thing. The same principles could apply to your video footage in terms of organizing your material. But I mean, I have photos over a decade ago, right? So keep all data secure and restrict access to authorized personnel only. Again, I appreciate the spirit of that particular concern. This is going to be very important, particularly if you're dealing with items like cameras that could be hacked. Someone, getting through the internet if you have a Wi-Fi based one, or perhaps even a cellular one. I mean, I guess it's possible for people who are technically savvy to break into these sorts of things. And then, of course, you have physical theft, right? Someone could just grab it and take the SD card, right? So this is certainly an issue. And then accountability, be able to demonstrate compliance through documented policies and assessments and regular reviews. That is, you need to always be updating your policy and practices to make sure you're following the latest guidelines. That can be kind of hard for a single operator, right? And even for larger businesses because, the grind gets to you and you're like, oh, I got to update this policy again. There's a new change or new equipment, whatever the case may be. I mean, I was recently using a cellular-based trail camera, and I kind of really liked it. Had just one little issue with it. I'll probably do a podcast on my experience with it, but nevertheless, I was relatively pleased with it. I'd probably give it an A- in terms of what it did for me. But again, you could see how this could be used improperly, how it could be taking pictures that are problematic, and what happens, if that technology was a major change from a trail camera that didn't have Wi-Fi. Let me just hold that up here, right? So this doesn't have Wi-Fi, but it still can collect a lot of information, right? So this is something we've got to be thinking about, right? So another head point that it talks about here is getting your paperwork in order. Yeah, we all love paperwork, don't we? But it is necessary. Again, remember, we are in a very litigious society. So I really want to encourage you to get ahead of this, folks. Okay, and this is one of the benefits, maybe if you're part of a state association or something, or where you can have some colleagues where you can sort of share some of these legal expenses that could be occurring, where maybe the organization could have a template just like you have here with the BPCA. That's pretty nice. It's always cheaper to have something already pre-done in hand to your lawyer to sort of check over for your particular state, for instance, rather than asking him to draw something from scratch. Okay. Look at your security considerations for your Wi-Fi cameras. Now, they talk about 3 different types of cameras. Your trail camera, of course, no connectivity. Wi-Fi cameras where you're connecting to the local network. And then you have, of course, something that's cellular. Now, there's also one thing I didn't, that it doesn't mention here, which I'm a little surprised by. It doesn't talk about satellite. And so that would be a possibility as well. You think of something, like Elon Musk is Skynet or Skylink, I think it's called Skynet. I think that's from from a movie, I think. But and nevertheless, but I think there's a fourth option now. It's certainly not going to be very common, but you certainly have some of your there's some things out there that certainly deal with satellite. But nevertheless, talks about security considerations for your Wi-Fi cameras, making sure that your firmware is updated, that you're using strong passwords. That means you should probably have something where there's at least 10 characters. Right, and then make sure it's 10, not just 4, something like that. Making sure you're getting informed consent and checking your equipment, and that you're reviewing your reports. And so then goes into keeping compliant and professional, and it talks about some of the documents that they have here, and that you need to be thinking about what happens even if you're storing that data onto your computer, for example. How secure is your computer, right? What's the likelihood your computer is going to be hacked? Are you keeping that up to date? Because you can say, well, I have all the security here with my cameras, I lock them up and I make sure, I'm pointing them the right direction. But then I download into my computer, but I don't have a good security system, and I haven't had my router updated or whatever, and I'm using a weak password, and all of a sudden someone hacks my computer and steals the information. Think about what this would be if you were working on maybe a celebrity's house, or maybe someone who's a multimillionaire or a politician, right? Where privacy is a big concern, because you have nutcases out there looking to harm them, right, or steal from them or whatever. And so you don't want to be part of that, right? So you want to be sure you're following good practices here. Anyways, I hope this is something you found at least interesting. I'm sure it's not a joy for you, to be sure. I mean, you got, Stephen, you're giving me one more thing to do. Look, I haven't created this problem, right? I'm just trying to make you informed of this. And even though we're not behind the firewall, I would have loved to have had a look at this document here, right? But nevertheless, it gives enough information here, I think, for you to get something started in talking to your lawyer about whether you should have a separate document, or have perhaps adjust your present contract that you have with your clients and talk about cameras and video recording, because it's becoming so common now within the industry. So that's basically what I wanted to talk to you today, and hopefully you'll find that to be helpful. Well, that's it for me. I'm Stephen Van Tassel, owner of Wildlife Control Consultant. Hope you found this information helpful, important, even though you're thinking I'm the bearer of bad news. Definitely you want to reach out to me if you're interested in perhaps a topic for a show. Perhaps you want to be interviewed. Perhaps you have a particular person who should be interviewed. I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. Yes, even criticisms. And that's basically it. Until next time. Take care, everybody.
This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant Podcast. Vertebrate pest control is an inherently dangerous activity involving risk of bodily injury to you, others, and/or property. Vertebrate pest control also involves legal issues, so be sure to always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and/or other control methods when controlling pests. Wildlife Control Consultant LLC, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their affiliates are not responsible for your use of the information provided here. Always consult a qualified and appropriate professional before employing the information provided here.